Hey leader, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Baritone Advisors. We're also recording this episode live from the new Return.com studio. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe there as well. And as always, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's made an impact on your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, leader, in today's episode, you're going to hear my conversation with my good friend, Zack Blair. Zack is the pastor of Hill City Church and the author of the new book, The Father Code, Codes of a Connected Father. And I've known Zack since 2003, where we met at a youth camp, and we have been doing life, leadership, and ministry together ever since. And I've always looked up to and admired Zack in so many ways, and I've learned so much from him, specifically in the area of parenting, which is exactly what we dive into today. We dive into his book, The Father Code, and you're going to love this, and I really want to encourage you to get a copy of this. If you're a father, you need to read this book. If you want to be a father one day, you need to read a book, and so I really encourage you to pick up a copy and maybe even just grab a few other guys that you can read it together and go through a small group together with it. I think it'll really add value to your life. But before we get into today's conversation, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Baritone Advisors. The financial advisors at Baritone Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Baritone Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baritoneadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Baritone Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. And my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers and had an incredible experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for marriage. And we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And I also want to thank our new sponsor, Return.com. And leader, let me just ask you this. Have you ever had an interest in investing in real estate? Well, now for as little as $500, you can become a commercial real estate investor. Just visit Return.com to learn more. That's REITURN.com. Investing involves risk. Please consult the Return Offering Circular if you're interested in investing. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with my good friend, Zack Blair. Zack Blair, welcome to the L3 Leadership Podcast. For those listening, this is a great joy. Zack and I have been friends and doing life and ministry together for over 20 years, and my life has been deeply impacted by his ministry, his friendship, and today we'll be talking about, I'll have Zack introduce himself in a minute, but Zack just came out with a book, his first book, and he has so many books in his heart and such a message for this generation, and I can't wait to share that with you. So, Zack, welcome to the podcast, and congrats on the book.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for always supporting me and being a great friend, man. The real deal. Love you, buddy.
For those listening who may not be familiar with you, can you just kind of give a high-level overview of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm an Ambridge boy, Beaver County through and through. Went to Geneva College, wanted to be a pilot, and the Lord changed my life and dramatically changed my life. I was in a real rough spot. I was there on a football scholarship. Believe it or not, Geneva has the Bible as a logo. At least they did back then. I think they just recently did an update. I had absolutely no clue it was a Christian school. I was pretty angry because the coaches, when they recruited me, didn't tell me that it was a Christian school. And I don't know how I missed it. It was like God hid it for me. But there I found restoration. And, you and I, we met at Victory Family Church in Cranberry, like, wow, Doug, 20 years ago, maybe, like somewhere around there. So I've served in youth and young adult ministry for a long time. I was a youth pastor, young adult pastor, but we served with kids and youth a lot longer than that. And then 5 years ago, my wife and I started Hill City Church in Robinson Township, and it's been a journey, but family man and a father, and I love it. Absolutely love it right now. It's kind of chaotic in our world right now, though, Doug. You know that.
Yeah, man. Well, you've always gone before me pretty much in every area of life, and you wrote a book on fatherhood, and knowing you as long as I have, you have so many messages on your heart that could be incredibly helpful to people. But for your first book, you really felt led to write a book on to fathers, and it's called The Father Code, Codes of a Connected Father. And so I still remember when you became a father father. We live next door to each other,
Yeah,
funny
we're
enough.
neighbors.
And I remember you pulling me in the backyard and saying, man, we're having our first kid. And man, it's just been such a joy to watch you and Lauren grow your kids up. And really, again, you kind of set the path, and Laura and I look up and admire you significantly. I've learned so much from you. But why this book? Why this message? Why now?
The Lord put this on my heart probably in about 2015. What I had noticed is when in years of youth ministry, I realized that there was a big difference in the lives of kids who had a connected father. I started to do some research on this and started to see because I noticed it. So within the book, I'm telling stories that I've compiled. I changed a little bit of details here and there to protect people's anonymity. But that specific burden on my heart, I would say there are two things. There was a girl who we helped save her life. She had an imbalance in her brain. She had a chemical imbalance, and I asked her, when she opened up for help with us, what saved your life? And she said it was my connection with my dad. I couldn't do that to him, and there was just something that the Lord I was just like, what, like. A connection with her father was stronger than a chemical imbalance in her brain,
Wow.
and it saved her life. And so now I get a little frog in my throat thinking about it. But like when you ask the word why, I'm like, if I could just help one kid, that's it. Like that's it. And so for years, being a father, I started to realize, like, man, we have a huge responsibility, but we also don't have like a lot of guidelines around it, and there are things all over the place. And, there's no such thing as a perfect father, but we can be a connected father. And it's that connection that really helps. What I found, Doug, is the mom's job is essentially to teach her daughters to be a woman, but dad's job is to teach them to be secure in their womanhood. And then it flip flops. Dad's job is to teach his boys how to be a man, but mom's job is to teach them to be secure in their manhood. And when that father is connected to his sons and daughters, there is a security that nothing else on the planet can bring. I think fatherhood is the most important ministry or most important leadership position on the planet, is just being a dad, like lead your home, right? It starts there. Yep. So much, man.
Yeah. When you were mentioning people in the beginning of the book and dedicating the book to people, you dedicate it to your dad, your father-in-law, and then three other men that have had a significant impact on you as a father. Can you talk about that and why did you dedicate the book to those three men?
Yeah. So, I have Pastor Larry Betancourt. He was a spiritual father to me. And I just so appreciate his voice in my life. Pastor Larry showed me how to be a connected father. I'd come home with him, and, the 5 love languages, each of his girls in his family had different love languages, and I would watch him connect individually with each of his girls, and the security that has obviously brought them. Now the fruit is there, and he loved us. He brought us into his life, and he didn't want anything out of us. And it was one of the first times that I knew a relationship like that, where it was just unconditional love. And I could talk to him about anything, and he would actually still care for me, and even care more for me in the revealing of just like my deepest, darkest hurts or things I was struggling with. And so, man, he was just instrumental. I would not be anywhere if it wasn't for Pastor Larry's belief in me. And so I look at him as another father spiritually. And then my Uncle Dave as well. I was abused when I was a kid, and I went through some really difficult, not by my family, but by, sexually abused by 2 people outside of our family. And my Uncle Dave saw that I couldn't make eye contact with anybody. And he saw that I had behavioral issues. I was getting in trouble in school. And rather than like correcting me, he just simply put his arm around me. And that connection, it changed everything for me. And, he took me to church, and that's ultimately where I ended up receiving my healing, and obviously my father-in-law is a part of that too. So that was I have my dad, my father-in-law, and then those 2 men, and obviously my wife and kiddos.
Yeah. Man, that's huge. I mean, both of you and I are involved with an event called Man Up. It's actually happening tomorrow as we're recording this. And it just talks about the epidemic of fatherlessness. And what I heard you say basically through the men you dedicated the book to who weren't your biological fathers, where this book isn't just for a father of a family, but it's also for basically any man recognizing that they can be a father a fatherly influence in young men and young women's lives that can have a dramatic impact on the trajectory of their life. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. Yes, absolutely. So one day there was a girl in our youth ministry, and I'm just going to call her Susie. It's a great name for a girl, but Susie, right? So Lauren sends me a text, and she says, "Zach, have you talked with Susie lately?" And I'm like, "No." And I was like, "Is she okay?" She's like, "She needs help." And I was like, "Okay, well, why don't you schedule an ice cream with Susie?" And she's like, "She needs more than ice cream, Zach. She needs rescued." And the situation. I'm like trying not to get all emotional over this, man. Like it's like this is one of those stories you never forget. Situation she was in, Doug, is not a situation that most people would understand. She didn't have a bed sheet. She didn't know how to brush her teeth. Like nobody taught her that. And she's 13 to 14 years old. She's in our youth ministry, and she's 13 or 14 years old, but she's hood smart, because she can work the system. She knows, like she's super intelligent, but she was like a 98-pound chihuahua ready to fight anybody at that age, But Lauren said she needed rescued, so we started bringing her into our home and just creating like a safe space for her, because her environment at home wasn't safe at all. Okay. Her mom was one of the best people on the planet, but struggled deeply with addiction. And like, I love her mother. Right. And her mother eventually asked us, if I pass away, will you adopt Susie and bring her into your home? And we said, of course we would, and her mom is doing really good right now from all that I know. But I watched Susie be in that trailer park, fighting everybody, and, fisticuffs ready to go. But she'd be over our house, and she'd just be making brownies with her kids, and just like any kid, but she'd get back in that environment and just be fighting. And we found that when we brought her into our home, she experienced safety and peace, maybe for the first time. And I'll tell you what, we still keep in touch with her today. That saved her from a lot. Like her mom had her first child when she was 13 or 14, right around that age, right? The grandmother, the same thing. But she came into our house. Now she's happily married. She has 3 kids. She's one of the best moms I know. Like, I'm just so proud of her. I just have nothing but awesome things to say about her,
No, that's incredible. And so, this book, as you're listening to this, men, it's not just for dads of families, but you could be a dad and a father figure in so many people's lives. And Zach, I've seen you do that over and over again. And again, we live in such a epidemic of fatherlessness in our country. I remember Henry Cloud said one time, he said, we need mothering and fathering every single human being, but it often doesn't come through your biological parents. Find it. If someone's listening to this and they're hearing stories like you just shared, and they feel like they haven't had a connected father and there's a wound there, what would your encouragement be to them?
Obviously I'm a pastor, and so I'm a man of faith. And I feel that ultimately a connection with the Father heals, and it's in our world, there's so many beliefs about God. I'm talking with an atheist right now who's a very good man, and he's got a lot of really great insight, and I'm growing from him, and we're challenging each other. He was really upset, by the way, and he said, the reason I became an atheist was because you believe people go to hell and nobody ever told me about Jesus. Tells me how much you care. That's what he said to me. And I'm like, that is a valid point. That's a valid point, but I'm also there talking to him. You know what I mean? So It's pretty cool how God brought that, but those wounds are real. Those wounds are real. You grow up and maybe you had a disconnected father, or, your father left. Abandonment is real. What I found is, first, my faith is everything. I received that love of the Father from the Father, but God will bring people in every season to fill in the gaps. He'll bring a replacement. You just have to open your eyes to it. And I think one of the biggest issues is this, the fatherless mentality, though, carries around with you, right? So I realize this a lot of times where it's like, I got to fight for myself. There's nobody protecting me. That's what Susie was going through, but she carried that mentality all throughout life. Got to fight for myself. Got to fight for myself. And we see it a lot in leadership. People who have that fatherless mentality will be great leaders, but they're trying to make a name for themselves, right? Because they don't realize their identity isn't necessarily set yet. So they'll get things done, but they'll walk over everybody else because their identity isn't set yet, right? So God will bring people in to fill in the gaps, but we also have to receive that as well, right? We have to be open to that love. And now that real quick too, Doug, it can also get a little weird Like if somebody's coming to you and like, I'm your spiritual father now, you're like, you don't even know my name, tell me everything. Like, hey, like it can get a little weird. So you got to follow your heart. Don't go against your heart with that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Let's dive into the book. So the father codes, you have several of them, and I just want you to elaborate on each one. So the first one is we never leave.
Yeah. We never leave. Well, as we talk about not abandoning our children, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity to do so. There's a lot of opportunity to be. We get another one of the codes is to be there and present. So like not only just not leave, but like actually be physically present. But when we I open up the book, and when I say we, I'm always referring to my editor because she's just so amazing. Rachel Hill's just helped me so much to get this book out. But just as you spoke about, there was a census around 2008 that talked about fatherlessness, and when there's not a father in the home, the percentages that a child will actually be incarcerated or commit a violent crime or create more fatherless children, they skyrocket, right? I mean, getting an A on a report card. Fatherless children have less of an opportunity to even get an A on a report card, according to this U.S. Census, which is absolutely. I just had never tied that together. So we never leave. It's a charge to men that our presence is vital in the development of our children, to never leave. Like God wants us to protect our kids. God wants us to be there. God wants us to validate. And that's vital.
One thing with this, and man, this has always stuck with me, and I actually do it with my kids now too. Can you share, and I can remind you if you need reminded, but you used to take off your wedding ring and show it to your wife and kids. Yeah. Can you tell people that? Because I love this exercise, and just what it communicates to kids to give them the confidence of this principle is huge.
Right. And so even in the moments where, husband and wife have a disagreement, like these are normal things. We're not looking for perfection here. These are normal life things. But I say to my kids, hey, what does this wedding ring mean? And I'll take it off and they'll play with it. And, this one's a Quelo or whatever it is, but, I have another one at home that's just like real special, and I said, what does this mean? Well, you never leave. You never leave me. That means I'm always going to come back to you. I'm never going to abandon you. I love you with all my heart. I'm not going to leave your mom. I'm going to be here,
That's so good. I love that. Thank you for doing that again. Just thank you for modeling that. And fathers, if you're listening to this, I can't encourage you enough to do that. Again, the security that it provides to your kids is huge. Another code is just, you mentioned it already, is we're both there and present. You and I both know, man, we live in an extremely distracted world. I know you and I are prone to distractions here and there once in a while.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for dads on actually being there and being present? Because I know this is huge for you and Lauren.
Well, I asked a gentleman a while ago. He was a great dad. I said, hey, give me your best piece of advice. And a lot of the book is written off of me just asking those questions to great dads. Their kids have grown up and done great things, and they're solid. I asked him, hey, give me your best piece of advice. And he said, cheat your hobbies, cheat your job, but never cheat your family, And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. So I'm like, wait, what does that mean? He's like, well, if golf is in the way of my connection with my kids, then I'm going to be there for them. But when I'm there, he said, I'm going to be both there and I'm going to be present. So what I realize is, like, when we would just want to disconnect after a tough day of leadership, after making tough decisions, or, you see something, you're like, your heart's burdened by it. A lot of times we want to disconnect rather than grieving that. We want to just kind of pick up our phone and just bury ourselves in our phone. I just need 10 minutes. I just need an hour. I need whatever. And it goes, and you're there with your children, and you're not actually present. You could be there, but you cannot be with them. So they're asking you questions. I've had times with that with my kids. Like, they're asking, I'm in the car and they're asking me questions, and I'm like, yeah. I was not even close to being present during those times, So
we've all been
be both there and present. Yep. Me too, bud.
Yeah. I know one thing your family practices consistently that helps with this is a weekly Sabbath. And it's a subject I've talked about on the podcast a ton that's been huge in our lives the last 2 years. For those listening, can you talk about Sabbath and what does your Sabbath look like as a family, and why has that been important as far as being there and present?
Yeah. So that is vital. I mean, putting screen time down, and watching watching dad movies. Now my kids love to watch 80s movies with me, and an app that kind of filters all the bad stuff out. So yes, my
What?
kids have
Whoa, whoa,
seen
whoa!
Rambo. Yeah, it's
What app?
awesome.
What app is this?
Angel Vid. Angel Vid. You
Angel
can't
Vid.
watch any 80s movie, but you can watch a lot of them, right? I just love
Okay.
the predictability. Like, you don't have to think too hard. You know who the bad guy is. There's huge explosions. Yeah, they don't make sense. A car doesn't explode if it just like hits a telephone pole 5 miles an hour. But the kids love it. So you can filter out basically anything you want in that. So we watch a dad movie. I make breakfast. It's one of my favorite things to do for my family, and just be there with them. But, one other thing too with this, Doug, and I can even come back to Sabbath, but like, spending 15 minutes of intentional time with your children
Mm.
a day is vital. So no matter how crazy life is, just pulling them aside and talking with them, for just asking them questions about themselves, just for 15 minutes each, it's vital. So anyways, back to Sabbath, or where do you want to go with this, buddy?
Oh yeah, I want to go back to Sabbath, but I just want to reemphasize that 15 minutes a day. I forget when you shared that with me years ago, but literally in my head, again, you've had such an impact on my life. In my head, pretty much every day is like, hey, have I given that 15 minutes yet? And I try to have more time, certainly, but 15 minutes devoted time individually, each kid. Like, and again, in a distracted world that we live in, like you said, where we have so much pressure as leaders coming at us, it's so easy to unplug. But I think anyone could listen to, hey, could I do that for 15 minutes? And I think everyone could do that. So just setting those little targets of time daily, Sabbath is great that it's one day disconnected, but that may sound like way too much of a leap for where some people are. But 15 minutes a day, leaders, if you're listening to this, I know you can do that. But yeah, let's go back to Sabbath. So just a fun day. What else do you guys do during your Sabbath?
Okay. To set up the Sabbath, we have a day of work, and we have a full day of work. And so that's a connection in and of itself, because I'm teaching the boys how to do some things around the house. And, my son knows how to fix cabinets, you know what I mean? Like little stuff like that. It's really like my youngest, 8 years old, because he just focused. So we do our Saturday or our Friday day of work, right? So we have Friday off as a family throughout the year, which goes back to my schedule and my kids' school schedule, which is slightly different. So 2 consecutive days off. One of those days is going to be a work day. We're just going to bust it all day long. We're going to work so hard that all we want to do is sleep the next day. And that actually helped my wife so much, because her honeydew list is huge, right? So I was like, babe, when I come home, it's hard for me to get all this done. I'm going to, okay? But if I write it all out and we take one day as a family to get this all done, how do you feel about that? She's like, oh, I'd love that. Right. So we start with that. And I found that you can't necessarily have a good Sabbath without hard work. And you can't have hard work without a good Sabbath. You can't like sustain that hard work without a good Sabbath. They work together, right? So the next day, we wake up in the morning, I make breakfast. We'll watch usually like Mandalorian or something like that, or, a dad movie of the day. And
Rambo.
man, we'll do things. Rambo, baby. Yes, it's a true story. Ask Noah next time you talk with him, what's your favorite movie? He'll say Rambo, definitely Rambo. He's like so confident when he says it too. But, we just kind of lay around and just kind of do whatever we want to do, but we're connected and we're together. Like I'll play video games with them, but we're talking the whole time. If we do any kind of like, we'll go like anything outside, we'll go for a hike. We'll just be together intentionally as a family. And we're not perfect in that. Like there's weeks where it's absolutely crazy. Like the season that we're in right now. I hope that we can set this aside. Like I have to find a way, to make that happen in this new normal.
Yeah. And leaders, if you're listening to this and you don't practice a weekly Sabbath, I can't encourage you enough. It took me years to be convinced of this. Zach and I are both Enneagram 7, so we love to have fun. And what sold me on Sabbath was I used to think it was just like a boring day. It's like, what am I just going to sit around? But I think Dan Allender had a quote of like, hey, the Sabbath is the day we should look forward to more than any other day. And it's the day that we should talk about looking back more than any other day of the week. And it should be a day filled with fun, doing all these different things. So for me, I just thought of like, man, I'm just going to load it with fun. And it's been an absolute blast. So, and we can include several resources that have helped us with Sabbath. But Sabbath is obviously, for faith-based people, we're both believers. One thing I've always admired about you and Lauren is how you're raising your kids to really just know and walk with God. Can you talk about some of the practices or rhythms that you have in your life with your children to help ensure they know that one day they'll know and walk with God all the days of their life?
Yeah. And I could speak to that even personally and as a pastor, and, as a father of the home, like I'm the pastor of the home, and that's separate than my job, quote unquote, as in ministry. It's my job to lead my family spiritually. And so, my family has seen the faithfulness of God in their lives, and like right now, we brought in two little girls, and we just love them so much. It's a tough situation. It's a complex situation, but they're there with us, and they know what ministry is. One of the most important things that we can do is expose them to the pain of the world. And a lot of times as parents, we don't want to do that. We want to protect them from pain. But if they never experience pain, they're never going to experience growth. Like, it just doesn't happen that way, right? So,
So
like, think about weightlifting, right? It hurts to weightlift, but you're never going to grow your muscles unless you actually like experience some pain, right? So with our kids, I've tried to do my best to allow them to experience pain at a level that their mind can understand. And I've been in some situations where, there's been trauma in their life, and there's been some really crazy situations where we have had to protect them, obviously, right? But on the other end of it, exposing them, taking my son on a mission trip. This is one of the things I do is, when my kids turn 9, I take them on their first mission trip. We do a lot of work in Peru. If they just see a family of 10 living in a 1-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom apartment, they have one restroom, a kitchen, a living room, but there's 10 people there and they're loving life. My kids start to realize, wow, this is how I have it amazing. I'm doing awesome. Like, we have it really, really good. And that gratitude, we stir that up. One of the things I try to do is validate as well with my kids. It's easier as you get to know them and ask questions about like how their heart connects with God, right? So, I love sharing books that I read on prayer with my daughter, because she's just a worshiper and a prayer. My oldest son, wants to be, in his terms, a crazy missionary. Like, he wants to go into the most remote places of the world and preach the gospel. And like, that's awesome. So I share those books with him, and he's also a little bit more intellectual. So he loves C.S. Lewis, and we really connect on that. We actually read Hiding Place together. It was so fun to be able to connect with my oldest son.
So, Zach, you mentioned earlier about you, and you've always had a heart for adoption and for fostering. And obviously, that's a little bit of a higher commitment level than, just choosing to be a father figure to young men and women. Why has that been on your and Lauren's heart? And what advice would you give to people who may be considering, or maybe even have never thought about doing that? What would you tell them?
So our story with that is, Lauren and I wanted to have a lot of kids, and she had a miscarriage right before we had our first, and then she had another one right before we had our third. And while she had our third, she had some tremendous complications. And so she said, Zach, I think my body's telling me that three is enough. And I said, sweetie, I was like we've always talked about having a huge family, and I really wasn't open to adoption at first, Doug. I said to her, how are we going to make that happen? And I always thought it was just going to be our biological children. I really did. So Lauren said to me, well, Zach, like, I've really been processing adoption. And as a father, I was a little bit overwhelmed by that, because I was like, okay, and this is how I put it. I don't put it this way anymore. But at first I said, could I love someone else's kids as I love my own? Right. Like, my answer at that point was like, I don't know that I could, and I don't think that's fair to bring into my family. So Lauren's like, I just want you to pray about it. That's how we make big decisions in our family. Like, hey, I'm not going to talk to you about this, Lauren. This is what I think, but I'm going to allow you to pray about it. Just go process it and come back to me. I'm not going to bring it up again. And then, we come back. So she did that to me. And I was officiating a wedding, and there was a man there who he came up, and he was a pastor for a long time. And he said, this was, such a great wedding. Thank you so much for helping. It was a friend of mine, and it was his grandson. And I said, hey, thank you for all that you've done for our city. Thank you so much. And I felt in my heart something that I was like real insecure to even ask him, but I felt like I should ask him if he'd ever adopted a child. And I was like, no, I'm not going to ask him that. So I went around the bush. I beat around the bush. It's like, so tell me about your kids. You have kids, He said, yeah. He said, well, our first daughter we adopted. And he just came out of the gate. And then I said, man, this guy's probably in his 80s at this point. And I just said, my wife talk to me? She's really processing adoption right now. Like, I need that to drop in my heart. Can you help me? And he's like, yeah, I'll definitely pray for you about that. And he didn't say anything. He walks away. And he's like, I'm going to pray for you right now. And he's like, as a matter of fact, I'm going to grab my wife. And so they both pray over me. And Doug, I'm not even joking. Like adoption went from like here to here as they were praying.
Wow.
And I felt like, oh, I can do this. Then the next day, I'm taking my kids out to eat. We have 2 kids at that point. Taking them out to eat. I sit and pray with them around the table. And this lady comes up and she just says, I'm so glad to see you praying with your kids. It's wonderful. And I felt that same thing again. Ask her if she's ever adopted. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be more bold this time. I said, you wouldn't happen to have adopted any kids, would you? And she said to me, I've adopted 3 kids. And so, I was like, hey, I think the Lord is calling us to this, but it's a calling, the Lord also began to give us a picture of having a diverse family. Everybody would say, oh, you have, such a sweet, perfect family. And, everybody matches all the time. And we're like, that's not the picture that we have in our heart. We see multiple skin colors in our family where not everybody is looking the same, but they're our kids, and we love them. Fostering is one of my favorite things I've ever done in my life, just because from my standpoint, I can't speak to the situation. We have a good relationship with mom. It's tremendously complicated, right? It's tremendously complicated. I can't get into the details, but you think about the circumstances that would take 2 kids to have to be fostered, and the emotions that they go through. We love mom. We love those kids. They're just easy to love. They love being around our kids. I'm not trying to get them to call me dad, neither is Lauren. We're just trying to support their mom in a great way, and we're serving the family. And that's, I think, our expression. One of the things that challenged me is if every church in the United States would adopt 1 child from the foster system, there would be no more children in the foster system, right? Just one person, 1 family in every church in the United States. I said that wrong.
Either way, well, I thank you for the challenge there. And if you're listening to this, and again, sometimes you don't recognize something could be a calling until you're exposed to it. And when I meet people like Zach and Lauren who have been a part of the adoption process and fostering, I just always love them to share their heart, because maybe you're listening right now and maybe something started stirring or dropped in your heart. And thank you, Zach and Lauren, for being obedient to that little stirring in you. And if you're listening to this and feel that stirring as well, I would encourage you to keep looking into that and keep praying about it. And who knows, maybe God's calling you to do the same thing. Zach, I want to wrap up the book a little bit. We talked about a couple of the principles. The next one you have is our hands will bring love, not pain. Talk about that.
So discipline is very difficult. It's tricky, right? So, and with each kid, discipline, like we were taught like spank on disobedience, but then you look at kids, you're like, everything they do is disobedience, it's crazy. So like, what am I going to paddle them all the time? And I'm not big on paddle. I think like, everybody has their own way of doing it, but I think sometimes this is just my approach, and I don't mean to sound critical, but there's a smarter way. A lot of times there's a smarter way. So like if I paddle my youngest son, this kid it doesn't affect him. But if I tell him I'm disappointed in him, man, that really gets, and so discipline at the end of all discipline should actually be a deeper connection. The scripture in Hebrews says that the Lord disciplines his son. He doesn't treat us as illegitimate children. That means like a father actually brings discipline, and discipline is, we look at our disciplines. You have disciplines. I have disciplines. We wake up in the morning. I try not to eat Oreos after 11 o'clock at night. That's a discipline, but when you look at that word discipline, it's disciple. And in the context of that word, it's so relational. It's such a relational word, right? When Jesus made disciples, he had his 12 disciples. He brought them into his life. He talked with them about things. Yes, he had tough conversations with them, and he braided a cord, but he didn't whip anybody, but he let them see his anger as well, and so it's okay to express those emotions. But sometimes you got to there's a story that I tell about an older gentleman in this particular chapter who let a little water out of the dam, he said to me one time. And I'm like, that's interesting. Like, so if you're disciplining out of anger, you got the wrong heart. You've got to discipline with the best in mind for your son or daughter. And you've got to do it with the end result of being more connected with them. That's using our hands to express love, not pain. I don't want my kids to look at my hands and think, no, don't touch me, Dad, because those hands have brought me so much pain. I don't want that. I want them to look at my hands and just see hands of love, like these hands have held me and they've brought me close. That's what I want them to see. These hands never leave me.
Yeah. So
So,
good.
yeah.
The next code you talked about was we stand and protect.
Yeah. And so we talk about emotional, spiritual, and physical protection. That's what dads do. Emotional protection is a little bit more difficult for us, I think, naturally. Not all dads, but a little bit more difficult. Spiritual protection is big too. We've seen not all people in the pastoral world have good intentions, and it's a father's job to help his son or daughter navigate that. To be there for them if somebody's trying to manipulate them, because that does happen, right? And we're friends with so many pastors. Like, you've done a tremendous job of bringing unity to pastors, and by and large, like, there's just, like, pastors have good hearts in Pittsburgh, and we love that, right? So I'm not saying, like, be cautious of everybody. But what I am saying is there's extremes. And I tell an extreme story in that one of a girl who just needed a dad to tell her, hey, this is dumb. Like, this is not right, but he wasn't engaged. He wasn't connected in that. So it goes physical. Like, that's stand up. Like, I'm gonna jump in front of a bus for my kids. Like, obviously I'm gonna do everything I can to protect them. I'm gonna give up my life to protect them physically, but then emotionally as well. We have to help them kind of be a counselor, coach, counselor, consultant, colleague in life, where like, they experience the pain of negative words about them, and we have to help them navigate that. That's a responsibility. And then also spiritually, like, stand guard to protect.
That's so good. And the last code you talk about actually has to do with repentance. Can you talk about that to parents and dads?
Yeah, well, so the goal is to be an example in everyday life, and when not, in repentance, right? So we got to say sorry every once in a while. When you have, specifically, like, the firstborn gets the wrath, right? Like, they don't know, we don't know, and they're coming into our lives, and we're so hard on them because we think we're hard on the firstborns. Have you ever noticed every firstborn seems to be very black and white? Why? Because we made them that way. It's like, this is right, this is wrong, and then number two comes in. You're like, okay, I'm going to relax my grip a little bit, and they're like, but that's wrong. We build into them this sense of justice, right? And I found myself more harsh with my firstborn throughout life. And so I found going to him and talking to him and repenting to him when I haven't been an example, maybe I raised my voice to him, has actually built more trust with him in the long term. And it's allowed him to express, like, Dad, like, that wasn't cool, but we need to teach our kids character and integrity. Like, the word integrity, and it's like whole person, integer, right? It's like, it comes from the word integer. It means whole person. So I'm going to be the same person in every room I'm walking in. Okay. And kids need to be taught that, but also we have to realize we're flawed. There's going to be moments that we don't handle situations right. Number one, because they might have snuck up on us, or number two, like, hey, just like, we've never been trained on this, but we're just doing the very best we can. Just talk to the kids and just tell them, hey, I own it. I messed up. I apologize. I'm so sorry. It's such a big deal. Such a big deal.
Yeah, so good. Oftentimes when I'm interviewing people that I look up to in the parenting realm, I ask them, what's your best parenting advice? And I can't tell you how many times this subject has come up, but I never hear anyone else talk about it. But the actual ability to own your mistakes in front of your kids is so huge. I think I was interviewing John and Lisa Bevere, and they both said the same thing. Like, their kids are now grown adults, and the thing they look back on and respect the most, they said, their kids say about their parenting, is that if they missed it or dropped the ball, they would always acknowledge that and repent for it. And so I think that just leaves a lasting impact on the kids. So you end the book with a conclusion with a challenge to draw a line in the sand. What would be your challenge you want to leave fathers with today?
So the premise of this book, we follow the story of two men who have diverging paths, but they're in the same family. One made it and one didn't. And it becomes evident about the third or fourth chapter where it's heading. One drew a line in the sand, and he was able to overcome all the insufficiencies of his life. And he didn't focus so much on what he didn't have, but he had a vision for his life, and he had a vision for where his family was going to go. And I watched him, in my relationship with him. I watched him exude many of these principles. I know this man personally. His brother, didn't choose that. He got wrapped up in the bitterness of not having, what he deserved or what he felt he deserved, And so men, like, we've got to read this book. We've got to read this book from the standpoint of not that fatherless child, but the opportunity to give to our children what we never had a lot of times. And so draw a line in the sand, because your connection with your kids is one of the most powerful connections in the world. And you have a level of responsibility that comes with that. Now, the other part of this, Doug, is that I wrote this book to be read in relationship, so the opening, we talk about just true relationships, what they are. And so we have a hard time, men, we only have 3 to 5 really solid relationships throughout the course of our life that we can open up to and share everything with. And so I feel that what would be best is that men would actually read this book within the context of those relationships to hold each other accountable to those codes, because all these codes are our values,
Yeah. Well, thanks for writing the book. And yeah, I can't encourage you enough. Again, it's been a great privilege to be friends with Zack and to do life in ministry with him for the past 20 years, but to be able to have the model. And thank you, Zack. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for this message for fathers. Thank you for your example that you've set for all of us. And again, dads, I really encourage you, dive into this book. It'll help you be a more intentional parent, a better dad, and just make the world a better place at the end of the day. And so thank you, Zack. Anything else you want to leave leaders with today as we close?
You know what? No, I just want to say thank you with all my heart, Doug, for just all you do. You're a great friend and a great leader, and you've given me a lot of compliments, but I appreciate your friendship and I appreciate your leadership. You've done more for me than I think I've done for you, and I didn't get to share much about it, but just thanks for supporting me, man, and thanks for always being a good friend. Thanks for being there. And one of those true relationships that I write about in the very beginning is you, man. Like, you're it, dude. I love you. I love you so much, man.
I love you too, man. It's an honor to do life with you. So thanks for adding value to me. Thanks for adding value to everyone that will listen to this, and keep dadding hard, man.
Thanks, brother.
Well, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Zack. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/377. And as always, leader, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind group. Mastermind groups are simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. For me personally, mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 8 years. So if you're interested in learning more about launching or joining a group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds or email me at dougsmith@l3leadership.org. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and today I'll quote Dr. Henry Cloud, who said this. He said, "Codependency is taking responsibility for another person's problems and not requiring that person to take responsibility for their own." So good. And so many leaders are codependent. If you are, really encourage you to get help with that. You need set free, and it'll help you immensely in your leadership. Well, I hope that this episode encouraged you. Know that my wife Laura and I love you. We believe in you, and I say it every episode, but don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. We'll talk to you next episode.